Hello everybody, it's Chris from Rocket Lasso and welcome to episode 4 of Rocket Lasso Live, the live show where I answer questions live from the chat from both Twitch and from YouTube. I've already said my hellos and we are ready to tackle some different questions. I just had one little bit of, not big news, but I did launch my vacuum forming tutorial, which was actually spawned from a question in this live stream. So I can't scrub very well here on YouTube. I should have popped it open in the video file. But an entire video that will get you through. It's almost exactly 2 hours long. So it's not a short one, but I think it's really fun. The technique looks really good. I spent a lot of time refining it. And for the most part, you can go and vacuum form kind of, there's a lot of models you can put in and it doesn't require that much work to like swap it from one to the other. So there's a lot of really cool details and you get some really great looks to it. Next up is the tutorial that got recorded last week is already available on Patreon. So I'll put a link to this in the chats. You can go and check this out a week early on Patreon, but otherwise this will be out next Tuesday. And this is an advanced Xpresso tutorial where I stepped through it, so you don't have to know anything about Xpresso, but I'm going to go into a couple of advanced techniques for making more dynamic controls. It's something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I haven't really gotten a chance. So that is what this covers, and I think it's another good one, and it's not quite as long. I still think it's like 40 minutes, but that's because we're going slow and talking about a lot of extra details. But in any case, that covers the news. Here we are with R23. I actually updated my R23, and I've got a new copy of Redshift. I haven't tested them, but we'll keep an eye on that. In any case, I've got some questions that were popping in. WS Mix got the first one in the chat, so it's popping because WS Mix got the first one. Is it possible to do wrinkling, curling paper like in these bumpers, or is it just footage? Let's take a look. First of all, mute the tab just in case. American Horror Story. Oh dear. Okay, so first of all, if this is from them, this is from Lumbri, from Argentina. Yeah, it's an animation studio, so excellent. I don't know if I've seen this directly, but let's see what we got. Bumper. Zooms out, and then, yeah, so the wall is peeling, but I imagine there's going to be a more specific peel. There, this is, I'm almost guaranteed that this is what you're talking about. So that peeling, regardless of if, oh, there's an interesting detail. Oh, interesting. Okay, there's a couple of things I just noticed right away quickly. So you were asking is, could we do this in 3D? And I don't know, but we can try and explore. But the thing I just noticed is, look at, it's really hard to see, but look at this one right there. I mean, this is 9 years old. So let's, we're just doing a little bit of investigating here. So, you know, like Captain Disillusion, where he goes through videos like frame by frame and sees it. I happen to see, if you watch this little tear happening right there, you'll see that the texture is passing right through it. So that seems to be a texture projected on top of that rolling. So I'm thinking it's not 3D, because if it was originally 3D, then that texture would probably be stuck on the geometry. So I think that's probably time-lapse footage of maybe like a heat gun blowing on a plastic sheet or something like that. So I imagine this was filmed and then they overlaid a different image on top of it. So that's my analysis of what we're looking at. Having said that, let's see if we can, what we can do to recreate this in cinema. I have to say, off the top of my head, I don't have a great feeling for our ability to do a lot of this, because a lot of it just goes to like full on dynamics. So we'll try and isolate it to a couple different areas. One thing that immediately jumps to mind, and let's see if this is something that will work at all, is creating a matrix. And in that matrix, I'll feed a MoSpline of all things. Don't use those terribly often. So there's a MoSpline in there, a couple copies. Actually, the MoSpline itself can make copies, but let's do it this way because I want to see if something works. So this is per step. I'm going to say endpoint, and we'll make there be 12 of them across. You see, we got 12 different MoSplines. Can I feed in the effectors? Let's try feeding in a plane effector, and that's going to push everything up. Instead of position, let's do rotation. I think that's a thing we can do with MoSpline. Or not. I'm going to turn off the cloner temporarily. And yeah, this plane I'm feeding it to the effector. It doesn't just affect the position, right? Is it only the position? I thought that each step could be rotated. Huh. I thought that's a fundamental understanding of MoSpline of mine that isn't quite doing what I thought it would. That's not necessarily the biggest deal. Let's take a look at a couple things. I'm going to, let's see, bend. Okay, bend. I'm going to add a bunch of bend into this. You see how it's going to spin around? And if we give that a little bit of fall off, I'm not sure if, if I take this first point of the spline and start pulling it down, you can see we actually twist in on itself, and we could even do a little bit of extra twisting if we do that. So that's one. Make a copy of that MoSpline, and this one will have a 0. Careful about dragging because it zeroes out at negative. So you can see I've got one curled one and one straight one. I'm curious if we put that into a blend mode. Okay, it does indeed. It's giving us a transition between the two, which might enable us to do things with some fall offs. That is a transition between them. How can we control this with a fall off? Well, a thought here is, how about a plane effector? And the plane effector is pushing up right now, but I would like it to control, it's not the time offset, I think it's the weight transform. Or no, modify clone, that's the one. So you see if I change this modify clone to any value that isn't 0, it's going to completely override it. So by dragging modify clone up all the way, this now becomes, it's overriding, saying that is what this motion is. That means if I give it a fall off, say a linear field, I should be able to take this linear field and drag it through, and each one in sequence. And keep in mind, we literally have no keyframes. Then I can now do a transition out. So that by itself is actually kind of neat. I like that. Can I feed this cloner into a loft? Seemingly yes, but maybe not. Let's see. So that's in a loft, and what happens if I start pulling? Oh, okay, that is indeed seemingly working. So the loft is taking on these properties. Let's check the poly count. That's not terrible. At the bend, I'm not sure if the length changes or not. The count, there's a lot of counts here that could be relevant. This mesh subdivision is how many in-betweens that there are. And then we've got this mesh subdivision, which is how many deep there are. The spline has a lot of points. There are a lot of points involved in that curl. I think 100. Yeah, 100 steps. So there are 100 points in that spline. So we could crank this all the way up to 100 before we get to maybe 101 or 99. I'm not sure. But that is, we can keep going and we're still getting resolution all the way up to that point. Having said that, I don't think we actually have to go up that high. I'll say 24. And we can actually see that transition happening there. We stretch this out as wide as we want, and that becomes the actual transition happening. And you can actually see this unfurling and twisting outward. So this kind of by itself, that's kind of neat. Now this is, we're not exactly peeling anything, and like I said, I'm not entirely sure how far I'll be able to go because I don't have a lot of thoughts on the way we might be able to do these things. So that is all twisting inward. We can add some variation to this by going into the plane and overlaying this by, let's say, a random field. This random field could add, we could overlay, we could add, I'll try overlay. So it's a random field set to overlay. It's set to noise. There could be a much larger noise. And as I make it larger, it's going to make it a little bit more uniform. You see the uniformity begin to emerge. And adding a little bit of animation speed, I should be able to hit play, and you'll see that there'll be a little bit of variation in the way that's twisting around. I don't actually want animation speed. But now, as this twists through, you're going to see, because it's overlaying, that it won't be perfectly unraveling at the same time. Some will go earlier, some will go later. So those are all spinning out. Potentially, we'd want that to do something like overshoot and then settle in. I mean, if it's peeling off of a wall, then I guess technically it'd be more like something like this. So we're actually pulling inward. So, and I mean, you see I'm twisting around where the other thing probably just like flopped over. But I've got a couple ideas here, so I just would like to continue with it. So let's say we wanted, well, we've got a lot of things we could potentially do. If we add some randomness to the cloner, I should be able to say, okay, cloner, get a random, not position, but how about some scale? And we'll do some uniform scale and start scaling this. And it'll go up and down right now, but I can add a little bit of scale variation, which is completely independent of this being able to go and twist around. but you can see that's doing a fine job. And even when it's fully twisted, there's going to be a little bit of scale to it because those are scaling up and down. So a little more variation. So here is the next thought. That is sort of peeling off the wall. We could add that variation if we wanted to. I'm seriously making this up as we go because I didn't know how I was going to do this next step. But how about we lower this to, we don't need quite so many. I'll say 6. I'll change, yeah, we'll say 6 and lower this down to what, like 100? So it's a little thinner now. And if I pull the linear through, it'll twist it. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. That's fine. Now, what if... will this work? I shall make another cloner. And this cloner will clone the end result of everything. And the fact that these look different is a good sign. That will be 1 by, I don't know, we don't have to go too overboard. Let's say 1 by 6 again. And how wide is that? It's 100 wide, so we should be able to say per step x 100. Oh, I guess it's half that amount. 50. Okay, so now you see that these are actually lining up. But the point of breaking those apart like that, and let's see, the random field seems to be replicating. It is noise-based, but it's based on the field. What if I say global? No, that still doesn't. Randomize sample positions. Well, let's keep that in mind. But for now, I've now got these different pieces. And if this is moved all the way over, and let's turn off that random for a second. You can see that this looks like a nice flat sheet of paper. But if I start pulling this through, then it's going to start peeling up. And they each independently are able to rotate. So you can immediately see them separating from each other. So we're getting these slightly individualized strips. And they'll each peel sort of their own way. So each one is doing its own thing, which is, honestly, this is doing better than I thought it would. But yeah, we can independently have these all roll and peel. So a lot of this just turns into stylistically, and once again, we have no keyframes. How do we want the final curls to look? So currently, if we turn off a bunch of the rig, we can see this final curled up piece. Honestly, I don't think we actually would want it to curl up that much. So let's play around with this one. This is the bent one. Let's pull back on the curl. And let's see. How can we, okay, we do something like that so it doesn't quite go all the way down. Potentially we could, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, so you can see how I can modify this to twist in some interesting additional ways. We could even over twist there, but then potentially the way we modify the spline could really change the way that these curls are looking. But you'd have to, build it in a very specific way to make sure you're not intersecting itself and that they just end up looking good. So I'm not going to go too far, but you see that I can just say, okay, that is now the shape that it transitions to instead of doing that whole spiral. Just by changing that spline as our input, I can now feed this back through, and now each of those will independently kind of be curling down. There's a pop happening. We'll have to look into what's happening there. But you can see that they now curl down into being that curled shape. Okay, why are they popping? Let's turn off the random field and see if that is possibly causing the pops to happen. Yeah, no, it's not the random field. That's interesting. Let's try turning off the second cloner. Oh, the pop even happens in this one. Did we change some? Oh, no, that seems fine. There's only 2 points here. I want to make sure that I didn't, if I added extra points and deleted, it might have reset the point order so that these are not the same. If I twirl this down, you can see that we have this different point count. We could have accidentally created some weirdness there. So in order to be sure, I will go to this spline, right click, copy, go into this one, paste, and then just very carefully move these points back to where they seem to have been before. And do we still get that pop? We might. Yeah, that's kind of a harsh transition. I'm not sure why. It's acting as if I changed some setting that cannot be blended, but I don't see any setting. We didn't really change anything. We just changed this bend. Those can be blended. Yeah, you see how those suddenly just pop into a position? It's as if those cannot transition. I'm going to undo. Okay. Nope. Oh yeah, we have to go back to that curl. Okay. So. Is there a pop happening there? It's hard to tell. It does suddenly curl quickly, but I don't know if there's a pop to it. Well, this was a good spot for it to be, so we'll save this one here. Important to note that if you are supporting on Patreon, you can get access to these scene files. Curling wallpaper. All right, so we went back to the slightly simplified form. For whatever reason, that transition was really popping on us. If I go back to the bend and just say, hey, don't bend as much. It's gonna, yeah, still no pop. But I kind of like the idea of this being able to do this tear this way. And as this transition happens, this linear field could be affecting other things as well. So this cloner could be fed another random effector. And this one could be don't affect the position, yes, affect the scale. And I think Z, I'm going to start scaling up in a absolute way on Z. And you see it's going to start really stretching those, and that might not look good. But as I pull this all the way down and they get to their final curl, well, I guess it just kind of stretches them here. Well, I just wanted to show you because that random could also be fed the same linear field. So as the linear field travels through, they'll go from completely lined up to, as it transitions through, they'll actually kind of stretch through. It could remap to stop those from happening, or to have it happen more towards the end. But this scaling just on one axis is not super doing it for me. We could do it in a mild way, but yeah, it didn't quite like that as much as I was hoping I would. That scale, potentially you could add some rotation, which is going to be, yeah, on this one. So you can see I could add a little bit of extra spin on that, so some could tilt further down in the end. It still has the linear field. So as this peels through, they'll all be in the same spot in the beginning, but as they rotate, they will all end at slightly different curls. So that's not terrible. They all kind of curl at the same time. This rig isn't bad. I do like it. I can hit save just to override that one. Here's a slight alternative, which is let's kill off this bent version and put a second, well, let's not do that quite yet. Here's a MoSpline, and I want a bend, and this bend will be rotated that way. And made a child of the MoSpline. Tell that to fit the parent, so it should get super skinny. And now I could tell that to bend, and if I give it the correct orientation, whoa. Turn that off for a second. What are we doing here? Why is this bend? The bend is, oh, I always forget. They changed the way that the bend works. They changed the fit to parent, so I have to set this to Z and say fit to parent, I think. Yeah. I had to fit the parent in the correct orientation. So 90 degrees. Nope, negative 90. There we go. Now it's spinning up the correct direction. All right. Sorry, orientation problem. So here's the thought is now instead of it curling, let me hide the bend. And honestly, the spline is a pain because you get this thickness on it, and I don't want that. So I'm going to say object, display mode, line. So now it's just the simple spline. Anyway, we've got a bend deformer, and if I pass this bend deformer through the line, and even with me having it, I'm trying to hide it so we don't see it, but as I pass this through, it's going to start spinning it. And even if I shoot it past, it's going to keep on shooting out the end. That's limited. If I keep on spinning that even further, we can get a full twirl. So that's a full 360. So now I can roll it up all the way down. And then if we rotate that ever so slightly, up, you can see we actually get a better twirl. This might show the effect better. So I still have to move it linearly. So I'm going to set this to, oops, I'm going to set this to world mode. And now you see as I rotate back, and now you can actually see the line. As I move this bend back, you'll see it actually curl up and then spin around. Because of that offset, it won't intersect itself. And I can just keep on pulling that until it gets to its final point. But we get this much better. Instead of the entire thing curling, it's just starting on the end. And the smaller we make this bend, so if I keep shrinking this bend, then the smaller that turn will be, and it should be able to spin around. Actually, I guess it stops there. How do I make it... I mean, it's not within box. Or maybe it is within box, and we'd have to make it taller and spin more. So let's try setting that to 222, and we'll spin up to 270 or 720. So now, yeah, it should be able to spin up to twice. So now you can see it spins around, and I can just end it there. So that's the thought. So if I make a second copy of this, and we're doing the blending, I can just take one of them and pull the bend back. The only parameter that changed is the Z position of the bend. So hopefully now if I turn on the cloner and grab the linear field, hopefully that will transition those two. Yes. So now you can see we're getting the same effect, except it's actually twirling from the tip instead of the overall thing. And I think that's going to do a lot for the curl here. So now we've done that. Everything else should just keep working. And then we do have that random. I do like the random, but we'll worry about that in a moment. So turn that off. This is random rotation. Turn that off for a moment just so we can look at the curling. And already I like the look of that better. So let's grab this linear. And now as this passes through, those curls begin, but they begin on the end of the piece of paper. And then they start rolling down. And then they'll end right there. So if you want it just kind of rolling, that is indeed doing the rolling. This linear fall off is going to be the speed of that transition. So if it's bigger, then you're going to get more of like the entire sheet look going. And then this random field is doing the overlay. If we turn that off, it'll get rid of all the variation. And then we can just see these really straightforward curls. And those can all peel down. And then, as I said, if the random rotation is on, then they'll all be spinning off the wall, which could be nice for the end result, but might look a little bit wonky as this comes in. You see that they're kind of peeling away from the ground, which would be the wall. So if I did want that effect to translate through better on the random field, I can go into the fall off, and here's that linear field. I don't want to modify that because it'll modify the master one, but being in this random effector, I could say, how about a curve? And now we can remap that curve. And if I pull this all the way back, I can say, actually, I only want this effect to start happening at the very end of the transition. So we can even have that fade in. And it can probably end somewhat abruptly. I'll have it be shallow. Now that could get remapped, and now you can see that they are all laying on the ground. And now only at the very end, we should suddenly see it kind of curl away from the wall. So I was able to remap the same linear field to randomly get that offset. And you can see when they're all done, they'll have curled differently. Now there is a uniformity between them. I'm trying to think of, I mean, yeah, we can see them be individual, but there is a certain uniformity. I'm trying to think of ways we could make them be less so. It is tough though. Some of the, let me think. Well, let's look at our poly count. There's actually quite a few polygons here. I don't think we need that many for what we're doing. So I will reduce that dramatically. Actually, we can do that. So now we're just literally seeing each of the bends. And then this is how many subdivisions are happening vertically. That can have a reasonable amount. I mean, this being closer to square is always a good thing. So those all get lowered a bit. So I don't know how well this will work, but something I think could be neat. I don't know if it'll work. I wonder if bend keep length would help. Not so much. They do seem to stretch a bit. I'm not sure of any way around that. But anyway, as those come through, that should be pretty much the same effect, just slightly lower resolution to, in theory, run quicker. We could make more. One of the reasons to do that is I'm thinking about, we could use a displacement. Let's make a random deformer, though. Is that a good idea? Random deformer? Maybe. A random plane, that might be good. But let's start with random. This would go into, I suppose this entire thing gets put into a connect object. It could be in a null, but I'll put it into a connect. So hold down Alt, create the connect. And welding could be a thing here where they are welded or they are not welded. And then now inside that displacement or inside this connect, I could grab this random, which I should rename random displace, because that will displace things. As soon as I turn it on, it's going to look super crazy. But if we change this to a reasonable orientation, currently it's on X, Y, and Z. Get rid of that, get rid of that. Z, I think, is actually, it might be X that we want this time. Yeah, so if I modify on X, we start adding variation left and right. This is set to random. It's just random, which means it's looking at the index. And it might be identical per. I'm not sure. I'm just curious what will happen if I start passing. Oh, it's, okay. It gets really, okay. It's not surprising. It's kind of getting all staticky. You see it's pop, 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 pop. That's because we're using a connect, and that means points are getting added and subtracted, which means they will kind of explode. So you would turn that off, and I can see how you can see that they don't line up. So what I kind of want to do is set it to noise. If I set to noise and it is set to global, but why are they? That's odd. If this is set to global, maybe this space has to be Effector. Okay, there we go. So this is set to a global noise, but that global noise is being calculated relative to the parameter transform space, which is currently set to the node, which means each one is getting kind of their own unique seed. I want it to be global. So to make it global, I can say, don't be based off of the node, be based off the effector. And now they're all referencing the exact same thing, which is this random displace, which means as I increase this, you see everything's getting deformed and all the points are getting kind of deformed next to each other. Now, the hope here is when this is not peeled at all, you know, if we're just looking at this flat, I mean, ignore the left and right edge, but you see that we still get that flat top and everything is still perfectly in line with each other. But as we drag this through, it's going to peel away, but they're not perfect. We don't see it too strongly, but you see that they're not perfect lines anymore. They actually can weave in and out a bit. You can push this random, not that random, the random displace until one line crosses another. Once that happens, you could potentially get some bad geometry. So like right there seems to be the limit of what I can do here. Keep in mind this is based on a noise, so I could change the scale, so it could be bigger or smaller. But once again, we don't really want those intersecting each other, so we have to always make sure that those don't quite overlap. Yeah, and then as that passes through, we can get a little bit of extra randomness. If we do pinch this in more, we should be able to get the individual sheets doing their own thing more. And those have a little more randomness the way they are. This entire thing, I would, because we made it low poly, the entire thing I'd put into a subdivision surface at the end so that they can get smoothed out. The connect should be welding, and that'll get rid of those cracks in between. And because, yeah, we changed everything else, so that should just work. So now we get these individual pieces peeling off, and then they kind of end. I don't know. There's something here. It's interesting. I like a lot of it. It's not perfect. I'd want to explore it some more. It would be great if we could... Like, this can line up an edge all over the place, but the ability to tear would be really good, but I can't think of a specific methodology to make them tear. There's always more to do, and different rigs will do completely different things. This final edge is just kind of popping down. I don't like that. I'd probably have a transition in earlier. So under here, that could ease in a bit more. The more that eases in, the more that'll just sort of work. Yeah, that looks better already. I'm going to try. Well, the things I would love to do is have these keep some of them peel down further and others don't peel down as much. Actually, can we do that? Now that I think about it, I think we can. So we had that random field, and this random field is currently, this random field is currently set to overlay, which is sort of a variation on top of this bend pulling through. With our lower poly count, I kind of want to make this one cloner have not quite so many. If we just say 2, it's going to be like a smooth transition of just like one side and the other. What did that do? I guess that makes sense. Maybe we'll do 3. Yeah, because that's how much resolution there is. I guess maybe we do need them. I was hoping we get away without having them, but I'll add more. The more we have, the more that we'll see kind of a transition between them. But with the low poly count, that's getting a bit chunky. The, let's see, that is, increase that resolution, and then yeah, that'll at least give an in-between on each. So anyway, the thing I thought of that I'm kind of excited if it does work is as these pull down, they're rolling into their final position, and that's with this overlay. I don't think we need the overlay right now, but if we add a different modifier, a new random field, this will kind of clamp it. So this will be a random field clamp. And I would like this to represent some sort of maximum. It's currently set to noise. It's going to be hard to see. I want to just see the effect of that. So I'll turn off the other fields and you see what it's currently doing, which is good. That's what I want. That's when it's set to noise. If I say random, it seems that it's applying to each okay, it's applying to each individual copy. Yeah, this is the way the cloners nest. I'm going to save another version of this. Let's turn that off, turn this on, just so that there's something to play with. And I'll call this dot move. Save this as another version before I mess it all up. I'm just having fun with this one, which is why we're still tinkering with it, but we can, we'll go and simplify. In fact, we should simplify some things. I'll turn off that random displacement just so that the curls look nice and clean. What I want to do is have each one of these clones, and that's what's being fed the random rotation. Can we do, I'm going to turn that off. Can we do an offset from this cloner? I think that would have to be a transition from each of those. I don't think there's any kind of modify clone when, yeah, there's not going to be a modify clone when it comes to the second cloner. But I want the entire thing as a unit to happen. And currently we're feeding in most splines. So this is, that's tricky because how do I even do this? There's no index. Well, there's formula, but there's also the step. So if I use a step, what happens? Okay, so that's individually applying to them as a group. Come on. Well, I'll show you that the thing I thought would work really cleanly isn't going to work really cleanly, but that's not to say that we can't do something. So we've got this entire rig really clean, but you know, we could just make a copy of this linear field and say that this one is going to be not necessarily blending, we'll just alternate. So this is just alternating, it's iterating. So this one, we just say that this bend didn't go as far back. So if I pull this back, then every other one is now going to say, okay, I just don't curl as much. So that was a really simple copy. We could have done something more dynamic. I'd have to think about it more. But now, as they rotate, there's different sets that are trying to get to different goals. So you can see that some of them will go further and others will not go as far. And we still have that randomness peeling, so there's still kind of that bonus. So yeah, we could feed through different kind of pairings of these. So if I were to put another one in, this one I could say, this one only bends to 360. So there's a lot less bend, and now every third one, and we could randomize, especially if we keep making more of them. But by adding a couple of different ones, and I'll temporarily turn off that random rotation. So now we're just purely seeing the curling. So now one of them doesn't go as far, and then one of them curls half the amount. So you can see, even just with these three, as this transitions, when it's all done, we have 3 different types that's going to alternate between. And that's actually kind of cool. That's very controllable stylistically. So even though we are having to make more duplicates of the object, I don't know, that's kind of more controllable. I like it. Now that doesn't stop these other things we have. I could add that random field overlay, which I do have to turn on here. So that's that overlay again, and that's a big global one. But now that's just kind of doing that overlay. So when they all finish curling, they will end, but you see how they kind of transition there a little bit differently. So that's pretty neat. All this, depth stuff just goes to, we probably need a second cloner. I was just wondering, because in the same way that we're kind of controlling everything through this one, this one is just like a remap. It's a modify remap. Modify remap. If we made a second modify remap that went into this upper cloner, then potentially we could also transition between two different sets of these. And then we could start doing them as different units, and then the other thing would work. But at that point, the hierarchy starts getting really complicated. I don't want that. So I think this is kind of where I'll stop on this. Well, I got one more thought. And that's just because we've got something that's working pretty well here. The last one I'm thinking is, how can we, and I can turn on these wiggles again. How can we make them different widths? Because right now they're all the same width. Oh, yeah, that's part of the problem on this one. As these are curling, they're passing up through a vertical noise. So, and they kind of wiggle left and right. I think that might just be a limitation on that. I'm not locking in on a different way of doing it. But what I would love is if we could make some of these not as wide and whatnot. It's a little tricky because the spacing is determined by the cloner. Like there's kind of just a set distance on each one. So we'd probably have to make something more advanced to offset them. This is actually a little bit goofy, but I wonder if this will work. If we keep everything perfectly horizontal, you know how we were doing this displace trick? So everything is kind of displacing left or right. If we start making this noise really big on certain orientations, yeah, so we can't do it with a random displace, but we can do it with a random field. So just bear with me and then we'll get a new question. So if you did post a question, feel free to post another question. Anyway, here's the last step I'm going to do. Making a plane effector. I'll set that to be a deformer, and it's going to deform a bunch of things. Don't want to deform on Y. I'm going to want to deform on X, I believe, and that'll be based on the effector. So that's it. Right now what's happening is it's just pushing everything on X. So that's fine. Now, I want to modify that via some random field. The random field is actually more powerful than the random effector because this random field gives us more controls. You can see I have a relative scale here, and we didn't have that. We also have a loop period to make it loopable. So this is a random field of noise, and it's trying to displace things left and right. It's not big enough right now for us to see any coherence, but if I keep on increasing, you're going to see that we're going to get more and more uniformity. So the thought is, if I scale this really big, and unfortunately you can't put it on 0, so we just have to start making it really big. If we make it really big on a couple of angles, and I think we need to go really big on Z and Y. So here's X, Y, Z. So these two. So I'm going to add 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 to make those really big. And the hope is if we deform this properly and it transitions slowly enough, and actually, yeah, you immediately are seeing it. This displacement, I'll show you more carefully. See right here's no displacement, and I'm going to start displacing it. And it's such a big noise that I can start pushing it, and certain ones are getting stretched on the different orientation. So this one's getting skinnier and this one's getting wider. The noise needs to be big enough on this last dimension, or you can just see the overall scale. It has to be big enough so that we can, that individual ones don't get pinched too much. So I'll try making that a little bit more uniform. And that means I can now increase the X amount again. And now you can see I was able to pinch that even further. So there's a big one, a small one, a big one, a medium one. So that actually gave us a decent amount of size variation. Keep in mind that's kind of a displacement offset. I was just trying to keep the rig as clean as possible. But this curling, as long as we're just staying, you know, it's not, none of these points are changing on Z. Or I'm sorry, none of them are changing on X. So we can now displace X as sort of a post effect. And now we get some skinny ones and some long ones, and they all kind of instantly happened individually. And yeah, that's just sort of working. And I think the rig is robust enough that we should be able to say, yeah, per step. And I can just say more, 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 more. And as I make more of them, it's just going to create more. And that randomness still counts. So each one is getting kind of randomly scaled one way or the other. So taking the linear move, they can be one giant flat sheet. And as this transitions through, each of them will start curling down. And we do this pretty often when it comes to fall-offs, is if it's a really big fall-off, we can start making it more uniform. So there's a bit of a transition here, but you can see that those are going to transition, and they're all sort of moving at the same time, and they all can get to the end. But if we want them to feel more individual, I can pinch this down pretty tight. And now individually they're going to transition. The one thing I would like to have been able to figure out would be... Oh, yeah, I know how to do it. But see, right now what's happening is they're curling from one side or the other. If we wanted them to uniformly deform, actually, I don't think it's necessarily that difficult. I'm going to save this file. That's a good place for this one to be. So I'll save that for Patreon, and I'll save another version. And the last thing, the very last thing, is instead of this is transitioning between 3 different types. And let's simplify. I'm just going to delete 2 of them. So we've only got 1 type now. And this is the one that does a lot of bending. That is bending the individual most splines. But you say, no, we don't care about the individual most splines. The bend will exist in the loft. So I'll make a copy of the loft, and oh, this is still what's doing the transitioning. Okay, let me think. Yeah, the loft has to happen inside of it. So that loft will do nothing, and then this becomes the lofted material. So this would only have 1. And it's transitioning between one or the other. Actually, it's not the way I would actually do it the quickest way, but we can probably fake it really easily by just throwing this into an extrude. And if I put that into an extrude of 100, and I put this one into an extrude of 100, then now we get those. We're now transitioning not splines that then can get turned into geometry. We're transitioning between geometry. So that loft does nothing, and now we have individual geometries that are getting transitioned between, and the spacing needs to double. Yeah, so 100. And now, there we go. Now, hopefully, that wasn't too confusing. Now, as I transition this through, oh, they're just popping. Is there something about those that are not... I guess auto is dangerous, so let's say that they extrude on X. Yeah, there we go. I understand what Maxim was trying to do, this auto mode, but man, it just doesn't ever seem to work for me. Anyway, now that is the correct orientation, now you can see that they are... Oh, it's still popping. Dang it. What is it not liking about it? It's better, but not as good. But, well, you can see what I was trying to do, which is trying to get this curl to happen. It could just... It's all fancy with the most spline, but it could have just been a plane. Anyway, I don't want to spend any more time on that. I want to get more questions because that was really fun, but we already spent like over half hour on that one. Something to revisit, maybe I can make a more advanced rig. Maybe there could be a tutorial from that, but we would be able to make it so that each individual one will bend and not the individual splines inside. The same concept as applied. I just have to build the correct hierarchy. Anyway, I want to tackle some more questions. So back to the chat. That was from Twitch. So let's see if anybody is on YouTube. Let's see. There's a question from RBLX. Do they need a technician? Yeah, there's different tiers on Patreon. So if you are on the technician level, then you get to see the bonus streams. And if you're on the engineer level, then you get to see the bonus streams and get the scene files. XList. Oh, that was just a suggestion to try and do it with morphs and dynamics. I'm kind of done with that one, but morphs and dynamics. One will take over the movement through the dynamics tag. I'm not sure I'm fully following on that, but if there's a different approach, I'd be interested. And then next up, Chop said, in a recent live stream, I was using a plane effector in place of a Displace deformer. Is there any particular reason why I would choose one or the other? Yeah, well, there's 2 main reasons. And actually, I was doing this one, so it's a super valid question. So here, let me just set the stage. So in older versions of Cinema, I always used the Displace Deformer. I love the Displace Deformer because it was one of the only ways of displacing geometry in a very uniform way. You could feed in a noise, which was very powerful, and that can displace. But one of my favorite things was just being able to displace something with a solid color. So I could just say color, and the entire thing is getting pushed up in that direction. And there are times when you want to deform geometry and not move the axis. So I just love the displace. Now, having said that, one of the main reasons I transitioned from using this mode to using a plane effector, and if I put plane effector and say, hey, you act as a deformer, immediately we could do the same effect by going into the position and say push up on Z. And now we're getting the same effect that we were getting in the displacer. And it's got all the same powers where you could lower it and strengthen it. According to Maxon, I specifically asked, technically this one will calculate a little bit faster. This one is faster to calculate. And if you're layering up a bunch of displacements and you have a lot of geometry, you know, the speed does matter. But another reason why I like using it as the effector setup is now that we are deforming on Z, it is really straightforward for me to go into the fall off and start layering up different fields. And to me, it's a little more intuitive to create a random field to generate the noise, and it becomes kind of a physical thing in the scene rather than the noises we get inside the displacement. For instance, if I grab this noise and I actually start physically moving this random field, it is actually moving in space, and that is not something we get easily with the Displace Deformer. And let me just show you, if I make it large enough, then now we get this uniformity, and now I could move this around and we could, you know, create waves traveling left or right that way. And I like being able to control it I like being able to control it that way. And we get all the additional options with layering these things up. And now that we are in this field paradigm, and technically the displacer, you could use fields, but like I said, this calculates quicker, so that would automatically be the tiebreaker there. But it's a lot easier for me to imagine layering up different noises if we can see the entire list here, where if we're using layered noises inside of a displacer, it's essentially like a shader field. And then we have to start putting them inside of fusion layers, or we have to go inside of a layer shader and then start layering up different noises. So this simplifies that. And so I could just add another random field and tell them to add or subtract or overlay. And then we can clamp things. There's just a lot of extra variables that we get here that we don't get otherwise. So yeah, there is definitely a reason why I started doing one and not the other. And not to mention, like, you know, we get different types of displacements. Like this is just a plane displacement, but we could also do like random displacements. But a plane is still my go-to because there's good reasons to just use a plane. If you use random, that's going to randomly push all the points up. But if I use a plane, I can say, hey, all of you go up, but only apply a certain amount of power, which effectively is like the random. But there are some times to do a random. But yeah, hopefully that answers that question. I teardrop, maybe. Let me think about that. I'm going to take a look. There's a lot of actually questions coming through. I super appreciate all the questions coming. Let's see an earlier question. Oh, two people talking to each other. How would I use a cloner on a volume builder mesher? When the volume creates new geometry clones, it runs on the surface because of the changing UV. Any way to stick them to the surface? Ugh. I get the question. So the question, it's a very specific and technical question, which is, you know, I like that type of question. We don't need to save that one. I'm trying to think as I go, but the basic question being, if we make a volume builder, volume mesher, and if I were to say, we can keep it simple. I'll just make a matrix. Say the matrix wants to clone onto an object. The object will be the volume mesher. And it's cloning on the surface, and we have as many of these as we want. If anything about this changes in the volume mesher, if I start rotating this cube, you see that it's going to be like static. They're just jumping around all over the place. The main reason for this is these are just getting cloned randomly onto the surface. And every time we make any change inside of a volume builder, it is fully changing the geometry. Is there any way of outputting? I don't think so. Structure. Yeah, that's not, until we make it editable, it won't. But you'll see that essentially the point count is changing every time we do something. Let me just show you. If I make this editable and scroll down, this cube is currently 2,167 polygons, I think. Oh, points. Undo, and now let's rotate that cube. So in the simplest form, I've rotated the cube. You see it still looks like a cube, but look at the geometry. The geometry has changed. So if I make that editable and scroll down, now it is at 3,795. It's a completely different point count, a completely different polygon count. For all purposes, these are utterly unrelated objects. There's nothing in common. So if you were, and this especially goes to the idea, and I think here's what you want to happen. And what you want to have happen is you get these two blobs, and it's like, oh, all these points are stuck on the surface. And if I were to start dragging this, I want those points to stay in those same spots, or the same approximately relative spots. And this matrix example is just one. We just happen to be cloning. But the exact same thing would be happening if we were snapping with a dynamic spring. It would be happening if we had a constraint tag that was told to stick to surface, because it is trying to memorize a specific spot on this surface. But there's, like, what can it goes to from a programming point of view. Think of it this way. What could it key off of? What could it possibly be referencing to do the math to know where to go? Well, the main thing is indexes, like point indexes or poly indexes. But those are constantly changing. There's no uniformity to it. So as soon as anything changes here, point counts, poly counts have changed. So you can't key off of that. And then the other would be, it could be sort of location based. Like it wants to be like going to it from a location, but like so it goes to like, what does that mean? Like as this moves, like that cube is right there, and if this suddenly moves away, how should it decide to jump to the next one? It would have to be like analyzing to be like, oh, get to the closest surface, get to the closest surface. And then not only that, but like mathematically snap to it. So the point being is, and I don't think this is like a specific cinema limitation. I think it's just code in general is going to be saying like, hey, these surfaces are completely dissimilar. What method could I possibly be doing to say that these things are stuck there? So I'm trying to think if there's anything I can think of that would allow you to properly stick this to a surface that's completely changing. Like everything about it is modifying. So how could you possibly stick to it? I gotta say, nothing is jumping to mind. It's an interesting question. It's a definitely a big challenge, and you would be able to do some really cool things if they properly stuck. But I can't think of a way that they could stick. Individual, like if you just had a single object, it might be possible to make it be snapping. And then even just like, I don't think it's possible to make a clone, anything that's cloning onto a surface, stick to a mesh that's just completely blobbing and morphing. It might as well be, yeah, they are unrelated meshes. As a singular one-off, let's try making a single sphere and see if I can get that to sort of stick to a surface. And by sort of, I kind of mean it should be sensical, but it's probably going to slide around. So let me see. I'll move that below, add a constraint tag, and the constraint tag will be in clamp mode. And it's going to clamp onto what? Well, the volume mesher. And it's currently clamping to the origin, but I want to clamp to the surface and a distance of 0. So now it's constantly saying, okay, I want to stick to the surface, and it's going to always jump to the closest possible surface that it's currently on with a distance of 0. So with that in mind, if I were to grab this cube and move it, then nothing about that top is changing. Like that's still static, so it stayed there. But if I grab the top one, it will be changing, but it still wants to jump to the nearest surface. You can see there's a frame of lag. It probably wouldn't render with that frame of lag, but you can see it's actually trying to stay there. And here's where things get weird and interesting, is if I were to take this and start sliding, you see it's going to stay in space, but it has to be on the surface. But what'll get weird is if I pull off to the side, I can actually have it start traveling up the wall and pull it here, and I can push it down and scrape it off on this wall. So you can see how I'm kind of like scooting it along. And at any given point, it has to be somewhere on the surface. But it's kind of free to slide around. Now, you know, that would be more sensical based on kind of what you were just talking about, that you want you want this to stick to the surface. So yeah, that will stick to a surface, but it's not like definitively stuck to the surface. And keep in mind, the point counts are completely changing. It's just that the constraint tag in this particular mode, it doesn't care about a particular point or polygon. All it cares about is getting to the closest possible surface. So let's just see if there's any kind of sticking. So I can say I want to stick to, well, that's the direction. So we can lock position here, but I don't think it's actually going to lock. No, see, it's freaking out. And that's because the point counts are changing. My assumption is, and it was right out from the gate, that lock position is probably looking at the closest points to it and then saying, like, okay, you're closest to this polygon, so now you're going to be stuck to that polygon relative to it in this particular way. But that doesn't, it doesn't make sense if the mesh is constantly changing. I lost it. There it is. But yeah, this will just pass by. So I don't think that there's any way that you could possibly stick something more than this. So, you know, that is stuck to the surface. It's doing a fine job of being kind of stuck to the surface. And then just for if you wanted something, you can't make anything really stuck. But if you did want the big group, I'll save this because I guess that's sort of a file. Sticking to volume mesh, the hashtag ladybug behavior. That's actually pretty dang accurate. Like or a lightning bug. When they're crawling around in your hands as you move, they keep moving. That is, you are not wrong. Anyway, this is not going to. Once again, this isn't good. I don't think this is actually what you want. But actually, I can keep that sphere. Delete this. Make a cloner. Clone. There'll be a bunch of clones. I'll just move them up, keep it simple, and make them dynamic. Simulation rigid body. They should calculate pretty quick. They should be detected as spheres. This shape becomes a collider body. And turn off gravity, Control D. Dynamics. Gravity none. And now create a simulation forces. Field force. And then we have to feed in these cubes or the final mesh to be the surface. This will not calculate very quickly, but if I drag this in and say surface, it's the second slowest one. And we can give it I don't think the radius costs anything, so we can just give it a huge radius. And we're not seeing it, but if I crank up the distance on that. Oops. I do this all the time. I accidentally dragged the volume mesher into the fall off, but I really wanted that to be inside the object. Uh-oh. Cinema didn't like something I just did. It might be crashing. I think it crashed. Or it might be doing a crazy calculation. But I don't think it liked being in the fall off and that. We'll just have to see if it wakes up. Oh, it did wake up. Good. Okay, so volume builder. Field force, not there. And that is also set the surface. Maybe the distance does matter. I'll lower that a bit. 500 should be more than enough. And I think there's restrict effect, remapping. I'm going to say full strength. So that gives a direction. Turn that back on again. Field. Oh, okay. It doesn't seem to have been the feedback. Okay, now you see it's actually calculating. I guess that's not giving too much visual feedback, so I'll just turn that off. Don't worry about that. I don't know how fast this will be. Oh, let's also jump this up to 55. Okay, so I'm not moving anything. Oh, it's currently pushing away. The field force this is saying push away. Direction, invert, or don't invert. So that should be an attractor now. So this is constantly getting attracted to the surface. And this doesn't care about the geometry. This just cares about whatever we're feeding it. So, okay, it's not as slow as I thought it would be. But as I move these, they should be creating new. It should update so that they are getting. They do want to move and catch up to this thing. So they are constantly getting attracted to the surface. It does seem a little weird, or it's kind of confusing it. There's that midpoint, but yeah, why are they? What's going on there? I don't know. Is there the distance? It's really strong. The field force, object, layer, distance. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's getting attracted to the center. Why would that be? We can see the maybe when the mesh, when I move it, like the mesh doesn't get fully updated. Well, now it seems to be behaving. Why is it doing that midpoint thing? But yeah, anyway, the point being is you can now see these are getting sucked to the surface. It's not the quickest thing. You could potentially do things like, I'm going to tell these spheres to actually calculate as cubes. So collision be a box, so now they don't rotate. They're boxes snapping on there. And then we crank up we get rid of all the bounce. We add tons of friction. The forces would probably drain a lot of the energy out. So we'll drain 99 of the energy and whatnot. So now they're constantly getting attracted to the surface, and they're not attempting to stick, but they will very kind of mechanically stick to it. And if we crank the field force up to be like even stronger, so now it's really powerful. Turn that off. So it's trying to suck them right to the surface very quickly. But yeah, see, it gets left behind. I'm not sure if that's a bug or if that's would render correctly, but yeah, look at that. It's something that's like happening sometimes, not happening other times. Actually, what's weird is that it seems to not happen when I turn on the display box. That's, I don't know, that seems like that seems weird. It shouldn't be working properly if I have the display box on. But anyway, well, with the display box on, now you can see that those are doing a reasonable job of sort of sticking to the surface. Well, you know, and it's not so much sticking to the surface as being very attracted to the surface. And actually, I said friction, and friction does do something in the fact that it doesn't want to slide along the surface. But like literally, when I scoot this off to the side, it looks like I moved it. But according to the volume, it's not moving. That's brand new geometry. Like geometry is disappearing and then new geometry is appearing. So it can't have friction on the source if it's something that just suddenly appeared. So yeah, that is, those are essentially the limitations and the only ways I can think to get around the idea of there being any kind of mesh on here. It just goes to, it's the same way you can't really do UV mapping on these blobs because it's literally completely different every single time. So you have to use other mapping methods. I'll save this as another method because maybe somebody would be interested, but that's what I know. Hey, Abdo. Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. I don't see any links that immediately popped up. Okay, well, I like jumping back and forth, but I will say I saw a question I like in YouTube before I glanced over because I was just catching up in the chat. But somebody was asking, I retweeted somebody recently where they used one of my older GSG tutorials about Sketch Toon to make a sketchy look. Would I still do it that way? Let me think. Well, first of all, let me pull up the tweet because I thought it was cool. And I do love, if you ever make something from a tutorial, I love seeing the end results. So by all means, let me know. And who knows, maybe I'll pop it up on the stream. Oh, that's the link to the tutorial, which is fine. I'll drag that over. But I want to see the music video. YouTube. Yeah, audio's off. Okay, excellent. So somebody used, well, I'll pull up the tutorial first. Somebody used my tutorial, this old Sketch Toon styles. And personally, I think this is one of the, I'll just go ahead and say it. It's an older tutorial, but I still think this is the most important tutorial on the internet that you should watch about Sketch Toon because it is explaining mechanically what is happening. Like, Because if you're anything, I mean, even me for a long time, I just used Sketch Toon and I just would play with checkboxes until I kind of got looked kind of the way I wanted to. But this talks about the mechanics of how it's behaving. So if you want, you see how, like, even in this thumbnail, you see how there's like overshoot on these edges. But, you know, what happens when you want overshoot? What happens when you want them to match each other? What happens when you want them to curve? What happens? So it's very specific for your ability to directly control your Sketch Toon. And somebody watched that old tutorial and put together a music video, and the entire thing is using a lot of those techniques, stylistically looking a little bit different, but you can definitely see it's a tutorial where it's like intentionally, like, you want everything to look jittery. I think that's another one of my tutorials there where it's stretched out. That's the old Goo Rock tutorial. Very, very, very cool implementation of it. So the Goo Rock tutorial. But yeah, there's a couple shots in here I really like. This one is really neat. Yeah, all those pieces coming together. It forms the shape really well. And the transitions out are nice. Anyway, that's a thing. And it's really cool. The question is, would I do this any differently? And I'll put a link right now into the chat for that. And that, just in case anybody wants to check out that old tutorial. Oh yeah, and RBLX just asked if I could put the link, and I just did. I'll do the music video one as well, in case you're interested. I try to think if I would do anything differently. I still have most of the information about Sketch Toon memorized, because every time I use Sketch Toon, I'm using that knowledge. There was a lot of, this was pre-Signal. It's 7 years old, so it's before we made Signal. So if I had Signal, I don't have Signal in R23, because I think Signal is locked behind the paywall. You have to have GSG Plus to have the plugins now for the newer versions. So I don't have the R23 Signal. I'm not certain about that, though, so don't take my word. Anyway. I was using Xpresso to generate random noises for a bunch of different parameters. I would use Signal because it's really, really quick to drive them that way. It's the same idea, like just using noise to drive parameters that wouldn't normally be animated. Let me think. Oh, there's audio playing. Mute. But yeah, this is going through, and I think we tackle a couple of different things. Honestly, I'm trying to think. Honestly, I haven't super improved upon these techniques. It's just like the way to do it. So I get, even though it's like, oh, there's a cool question, and I want to think about it, if there's things I would do differently. Not so much. There is, I guess, because this is sort of a dead end, this question that we were just talking about this kind of conceptually. I will throw out one detail, and it is something I do pretty often with Sketch Toon. That is not something that was addressed in that. Content browser, presets, object. What's a good way of showing this? Well, it's always hard to beat the sculpting base meshes. It just gives good geometry. We'll use a horse this time. We never use the horse. So if I wanted to, let me see, how do I show this? I want to create a new Sketch and Toon material. New material, sketch material. So there's a sketch material. I can apply it to the horse. Immediately, if I hit render, you're going to see that it's going to be cell shaded, and it's going to be doing this white background. I don't want that, so immediately go to Sketch and Toon in your render settings. Here, I don't want this to apply unless I tell it to. I don't want any defaults applied. In the render, I always turn on resolution independent and then turn on custom. Whatever that is, it's fine. It just mostly means that what you see in the viewport is what you'll see in the render. And then under shading, say off. Under object, say off. So now it renders exactly as we tell it to, but there's a line around it. So to see it better, I'll make a sky. And now you can see there's a line around the horse. So by increasing the thickness a bunch, so we'll go up quite a bit, let's say 12. So there's 12 thickness around. One thing, one of the big things in that tutorial, the biggest takeaway, honestly, is all about closing or making sure that your points are connecting, and you can add additional geometry that way. So you can see right here, especially on the back of the horse, there's kind of this faceting. You can see that it's a straight line, straight line, straight line, just because it's not very subdivided. But if these points are connecting properly, and there's different settings, you can go into adjustment. You go into distort, and it's called distort, but I actually think it's more useful not as a distort, but as a way of subdividing your line smoother. So under distort, I can say curve stroke and say I want this to be a smooth type of line, like a B-spline. It's currently step size 6. It's fine. Under mode, say none. And now, if I did it right, now you see if I render that those have now gotten smoothed out because it's connecting those different polygons and then smoothing the line after the fact. We can try different modes like Akima and cubic. Yeah, you see there's slightly different curves depending on what it is. If it was a little, if the poly counts were a little more janky, maybe on the tail we can see better. You see edge, edge, and if I turn this on, look at these nice curved strokes we're getting to the point where it's going to overshoot the object in order to curve the stroke. So Akima will give you a different result. You see it's a little bit closer, and then B-spline is going to be they give different results depending on what you're doing. Now this is very low poly, so if it's a little more subdivided, this would be working just fine. But I do like being able to do that type of thing, like smooth these strokes out and have the blend for a very low poly object. It's just nice. And then the displacement on top of it, things like noise, this is nice where you can actually, it starts wiggling the line. So I can increase this and displace by more. And you can see that the lines will start getting super crazy and like overshooting like to an insane degree everywhere. So that is cool. Just typically I like to use that to smooth out the lines. That's not actually what I wanted to talk about though. And that other thing I wanted to talk about was, and let's see if I can even do this right, is layering up multiple lines and making them look right. So if I just duplicate that material, go to color, and we'll just make it super heavy contrast. We'll make a white outline. It's got the same, this will be secondary. If I render this, how can I actually make the situation such that it shows the problem? Maybe if I add some noise to it, noise to the thickness. So there's a bunch of noise there. That's kind of behaving properly. Maybe it's just not a good situation to show the problems. Maybe right here. I'm not sure. This might not fix this because I'm not sure this is actually the problem. But this is supposed to be a white line on top of the black one because I just have, whichever order we flip these is going to be the one that's on top. So we can just flip them around. So if we want this white line to connect all the way through, you see they kind of exist in the same space. They're exactly overlaying each other, and it's just this order of operations that changes them. You can end up with this type of error, although, like I'm saying, I'm not sure that is actually the error, so I'm not sure this fix will fix it. Anyway, what I wanted to get to is under adjustment, we have these 3D transforms, and this will actually modify it in world space. So by turning that on, let's see if we can do this. I'm going to intentionally go extreme and say on X. Yeah, I said I want to transform this line in world space. And you can see that the line is actually physically offset to the right. And it's actually existing in the scene. Like imagine there's actually a spline in the scene and it offset. And now it's passing right through the leg. So you don't see this line because it's actually passing through the leg of the horse. Now, this is actually something I have never confirmed, so it's a little dangerous to talk about. But if it's Y or Z, let's try Y, and that pushes up on Y. But I think that this says 3D transform, but it's actually, I'm hoping it's 3D transforming from the point of view of the camera. Because if I say to offset in Z, yeah, okay, it did seem to do it. I have offset in Z space, and apparently Z positive is pushing this behind. So even though we put the white layer on top, it's the secondary one here, I have now said to push it backwards behind the rest of the object. So if I do a really big number, you see that this line is now pushing backward in space. If we do a negative number, however, and hit render, it has now pulled it physically forward, and I'm not sure if it's towards the camera. It is on Z, so maybe it is axis based. But oftentimes I'm doing Sketch Toon in very set like dimensions. So the point being is I'm offsetting this physically in space on Z, and I don't have to do it very much, and it will make it so that that line will physically move in front of the one behind it. So if I can get that to work properly, and honestly it kind of isn't. Well, I mean, those offsets were kind of cool to show off, but I definitely am not getting it scooting towards the screen the way I wanted to. I wonder if there's a... because there's even like that transform. No, that just turns it on or not. I could have sworn there's a way I was doing this in 3D space. I think it was that, but I don't know. Maybe I was doing it, but I was, you know, rendering this from a perfect side view type of thing. So if I was rendering this from a perfect side view, let's see if the problem happens. Yeah, okay. So oftentimes if I'm doing something in Sketch Toon, I want these like perfect flat dimensions, and this will demonstrate it. You see how that this line is not connecting? If I tell this to physically move towards me a little bit and I render, then now you can see as I start scooting it in my direction that it is now pulling in front of the horse, and those lines begin to get connected where they are actually scooting in front of the rest of it. There are obviously additional dangers, but that's just something else that I do sometimes. Spin horse. But yeah, it's Sketch Toon. But anyway, at least the distort trick is a good one to smooth out your edges and make sure they're connecting. And like I said, their connecting is all about these settings. I don't have a good intuition for them, but the different match modes, thresholds, join limits are what actually decides if a point gets connected to another one or not. So like this is like the angle. So if it's like a really sharp angle, they don't become physically connected for a curve. But anyway, that's going to wrap that one up. I don't see any reason to save that scene file. It's just the cinema horse. Okay, well, Vogt is just saying that you don't need plus for signal, so that's good. Anyway, I would like to jump back to well, I guess I should answer that. My assumption was there because I had somebody messaged me and said that they were trying to get signal and they couldn't get it unless they were using plus. And so I was just taking their word for that was the situation. Let's see. Dean happened to post something. Let's see what this link is doing. Mute just in case it's got audio. What do we got here? Okay. Everything's following the rules. This is some sort of theater performance. There's some 3D projected in the background. And it's called Bamboo Dance. This is from Tobias Gremler. I'm assuming that they made it. It's 160 weeks old, so quite a while ago. I'm assuming that you're asking about the motion in the background. So they've mapped a character. They've mapped geometry onto like a mocap, and then it's echoing. There's that nice kind of breaking apart. But anyway, let's see, because we get that nice new mocap data, which lives under volume 1. Or is it its own thing? Motion capture. Haha. Jogging. So I just like the jogging one because we can very clearly see it. So that is doing its own motion and it's running away. Can we do the simplest possible version of this? Well, we might need to feed the geometry in, but I'm just curious. Can I feed that into a cloner? And then actually, what is that? I always forget how this works. I almost never, ever use it. But there is the... Did they get rid of it? What was the... Oh, MoInstance. Yeah, MoInstance. That's what I'm thinking of. So, what does that do? Yeah, okay, yeah, MoInstance. This is... I almost never use it, but MoInstance is the... what you're looking for, I think. So this is taking information and then it's going to offset it back in time, but also show the original thing. So it could be as simple as rigging that up and then throwing this into a MoInstance, and you get these echoes coming behind. I wonder if I put that into a group and then MoInstance the null. Will it move? Yeah. Okay. So I just had to put that into a null, and now you can see that. Oh, I guess I can't hide the original, but I could probably put that into another null and then hide that null. Yeah. So now you can see I get that echo, and each of them just moves back in space. Simple as that. The old MoInstance. We never talk about it because it kind of only does that one thing. Like, it's just got this history depth. But yeah, there you go. MoInstance. Easiest question ever. Once again, super simple. Don't need to save the scene file. That was really quick, so I'll do another Twitch one. Using Sims, repeating this video. Michael's kind of a newer name around here. I wouldn't mind tackling a question from somebody that hasn't gotten to ask a lot before. Procedurally create a slightly raised edges of paper cutout, like the foam of the beer here. That's an interesting sounding question. Let's see what we got. Oh. Cute. Okay, so this is, well, it's, the piece is called La Papertober from Rafa Micheleto. So, what do we got? You specifically said like the beer here. I don't see, oh, there, beer. Raised paper. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really cool looking. I'm assuming, well, I don't know, this could be 3D. Is it 3D or is it, is there any description? It's all in Spanish. Compositing illustrations for something, paper, occasional. My Spanish is rusty. Oh, there's the English right under it. Creating a papercraft illustration per day. Yeah, so I think it is physical paper. So I was just curious if it was real or 3D. Anyway, I love questions about physical things because that is really cool. This actually combines several different things we were talking about. There are essentially two things that make that look really cool, in my opinion, and that is the offsetting, which is something we could do in a relatively straightforward way, but I might attempt to do it with displacements. And the other is the edges get this like very kind of specific sharpness. There's almost like this little, it's like they're punched out or like a knife went through it and kind of pushed them down. And that is kind of the effect I'm thinking might be good to approach. We'll start out with this flower shape because we almost never get to use it. And let's see if we can think of a good way of doing this. I think it could be relatively straightforward. So, first of all, well, I don't want to use Redshift right now because I just installed a new version. I haven't tested it. I might need to update drivers, so I'm a little worried about that. But otherwise, I could use some nice paper textures I already had. But I guess we won't worry about the paper texture right now. Anyway, we've got this flower, and we need to displace it. I want to displace the edge. Well, I mean, because these illustrations are... they're not super duper complex. My point being is like there's not that much geometry happening here. So in order to, the more accurate we want this to be, the more we have to subdivide it, which is always a little bit unfortunate. But, and actually I wonder if we can get away with a Delaunay subdivision. No, that's cleaning up the edges too much, so we can't do a Delaunay. I'm going to do a regular grid, twirl it down, and here's, well, we say quad dominant, but we can, I think we can also say, oh, yeah, triangles. Yeah, they changed the way these modes work. They're all here, but some of them are a little unintuitive. But regular grid is the one I'm going for. It's making triangles to start out with. If we say quads, it can make as many quads as it can. Whatever number we set this to, let's say 5, we also want to go to the spline and change the intermediate points to be interpreted as subdivided. And then we can grab angle and crank it up all the way. And now it's a maximum length of 5. So even though these edges and the interiors are not perfectly lining up, they have the same approximate length, which is 5 units. And from here, I could even potentially be inclined to clean it up just a hair with a smoothing. So if I put the smoothing down, just watch what it does on the edges here. As I turn it on and off, it's going to attempt to even out those polygons on the edge as much as it can. And it's just kind of a nice way of that getting ever so slightly cleaned up. We'll probably need to subdivide this even more, but now we can go into some of the other things we've already been talking about today, and that is a MoGraph plane as a deformer to happen after the smoothing. And I want this to be treated as a point deformer. And I want it to push not on Y, but on Z. It's going to be pretty subtle, so I say 5. Looks like I technically want it to be -5. It's currently applying everywhere. Now, though, in the fall off, I could say, let's feed it the spline. Oops, plane spline. So we're feeding in the spline, currently set to curve and along. Instead, we have two options. We could do mask mode, or we could do radius. Let's try radius. And immediately, radius is kind of doing what we want. You can see that we're getting a little cup shape. It is looking at the radius and falling off and applying it only in specific spots. Now, we are technically pushing down, I think, all the paper except for the edges. So as we increase this, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe we are pushing up. But anyway, if we start shrinking our radius, you can see that we can start applying this just pretty much to the edge. But as I had mentioned, our resolution will be limited to the edge, to the resolution. Sorry. And so this is just the overall flower getting applied. If we don't want it to be like that everywhere, and right now it is exaggerated, but we could add in that lovely random field, which will multiply. And it's not affecting color. We can always turn off the color to... It's possible, if it shows it, it might be trying to calculate it. It's pretty minimal, but I tend to turn it off if I don't need it. So here's a random field getting applied as well, which means changing the scale of it. We should see kind of these little wobbles happen. So we could crank it up and then see very uniform ones. I could pull it down and start seeing very random-ish ones. I kind of like a little bit of uniformity, so I kind of know I'm in that range. If I'm any smaller than this, then I can't tell the difference between 55 and like 0.1. Like, it's just indistinguishable. But once we get to this area where I can start to see the uniformity, I know I'm in a controllable range. So 93 right now. That we can go into remapping, change the contour to curve mode. And with that, I can start pulling this over. And you can see now that I can remap the noise so that I can get that to be more likely to get these very low peaks. So I can say, yes, sometimes they can be nothing. And then grab this one and pull it over and be like, yes, but then other times it's maximum. And the closer we pull these in together, the more that we're saying, no, do one or do the other. I don't think we want to go that extreme. So I think like it can go to the ground, but not that much. And then for the peaks, like it doesn't have to be anything crazier. If we were inclined, we could stretch out the handle to get a little bit more potential. But yeah, now we get those edges curling up. And this is all about those little things being able to catch the light. I think, pulling this in or out is going to be like the main control that we want for like making it more subtle or less subtle. And let's even try and take a look at it from the top view. And here's sort of the thought. I didn't set up any lighting, but even here, you see that as I drag this, if I drag it all the way over, it's completely flat. But as I start pulling it over, we start seeing like a little bit of dimension up here. Even though it's pretty much completely flat, there's definitely a feeling of dimension. So that was the primary goal there. The pictures we're seeing seem they're trying really carefully, as far as I can tell, that we're not seeing an edge. This seems to be some sort of cardstock. It even looks like a recycled material, so good on them. And I'm not seeing much in the way of thickness. So for us, it could be like, okay, let's just completely ignore thickness. Or they're just being very careful and viewing it perfectly from the angle so that you don't need the thickness. If you did want to add thickness, that's pretty straightforward. In this case, that we could just throw that into a cloth surface. And don't subdivide, but yes, add thickness. And we just push that down a little bit. And I mean, just whatever the thickness of your paper would be. A little bit goes a long way. But even from the top view, I think that that's going to... It's going to occasionally show us that edge, which could be pretty nice. Now, their edges were a lot sharper. That goes back to what I had said. This is all about the this is all about the resolution that we're allowing it to do. So if I want to, slightly more than double our resolution, I can drop the size to less than half. And what was the other? Spline, drop that to less than half. And now I've increased the point count a lot. And now that that's so much bigger, we just have more detail, which means our fall off, which is pretty much our primary control. This fall off flower radius, which is at 0. I guess 0 just catches the distinct edge, but yeah, that can pull out or in, and we want to be pretty minimal with it. And now that everything's a sharper resolution, this is all just pushing way too much. So currently it's pushing out 5, but we can be like, nope, just that a little, like that tiny little bit is enough that from the top you can just see that detail sneaking around the edge. Having said that, if you did have, you could probably, there's ways you might be able to do that with shaders. If you have something that outline that, feeding a proximal in, I would say you could probably do that with a proximal shader on the edge, but that can get dangerous. Proximals getting sampled a lot can really slow down your renderer, and obviously that's only vanilla cinema. Or at least my generic knowledge is only vanilla cinema. But yeah, and what's cool is that if we build the rig well, like if this is all set up, we could even do some extra settings if we wanted to. But I could copy and paste this entire thing, scoot it up in the air, and we pick a different bit of text, or different spline, lay it flat on the ground. Make it a child, 0 out 1 Y, goodbye flower. We do have to do certain settings, so we do have to change that to subdivided. We want that to be down at 2. And actually, yeah, here's something that would be really good. If you want to save yourself a couple steps, I love doing this, is if we take our text or our spline, whatever it is, I'm going to hold down Alt as I create a connect. You can turn off the weld because that doesn't matter. That connect is now going to be returning whatever we feed it. So that means inside of the plane effector, I can go into the fall off, and here's a spline object. I can say, no, you are actually this connect object now. It's got all the same settings. It's doing the same thing. But now instead of me having to manually drag the new spline in over and over again, it's just already the connect. So we can swap out or add anything. Like I could just duplicate this text. I've got 2 of them now. Pull this one down, and that's automatically getting fed into the system. So all we have to do is make modifications to the contents of a connect, and then it will get applied. And this is purely talking about the geometry aspect of it, but this gives you that nice bit of geometry. And if it is a relatively clean, simple scene like this, which is quite lovely, then that gives you those cutout edges. Like you see it really well. Let's see if I can zoom up at all. Now it's kind of full res, but I'll do this. You can see right there, you kind of get that little messed up edge. And I mean, we all know it. Like adding imperfections to the 3D is one of the most important things you can do, because perfection is easy in 3D. It's the imperfections that make it look nice and real. And even that, as a tiny thing, the spline, as it's getting fed in right now, is very clean and uniform on the edge. But even if we look here, you see that this is a little bit janky. You kind of see these straight edges a bit. So there's potentially a level that we could deform that. And actually, I was saying that there are instances where I like to use the random as a deformer, and this is kind of one of those cases. If I were to drop this inside the connect, I could say that I want this to do deforming on the point. That's going to sort of explode. Yeah, there. It's going to, I thought it was going to kind of explode. Let's turn some things off. I'm going to turn that off for a second, actually. Something about this, it doesn't like, oh, no, I don't know what it is actually causing it, but I want to save this because I haven't saved it yet. Curl paper edge. Let's temporarily turn that off. We'll turn those off. I only need one of these texts right now. So what is it not liking about me doing that? Well, it's super duper exploding it, so could have something to do with that. So this is deforming the point. I would like it to not, well, let's just say 0, 0, 0. And if I start increasing, actually even just Z here, Z is relative to the edge. So that seems to be the singular one that we need to change. So even a 0.5, even that seems like too much, but just adding that little imperfection onto those edges, and the rest of the system should be able to compensate for that now. Yeah, so you can turn that on, and now I've got slightly imperfect edges. Yeah, you can see right here really well. All that nice detail, which should just read quite nicely. Potentially, it's a little dangerous. You can see, yeah, the poly counts are so nuts. I would love to, like, do a bevel, but I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Let's simplify this as much as we can. So let's see, what's the cleanest? Maybe just uppercase I. Yeah, this is going to be the simplest geometry I can feed. This is not so crazy for me to do a bevel. I just want to see if it really catches the light for us. And once again, we don't even have, this is just like basic cinema lighting. And here's where the bevels get dangerous. Look over here. We already have a little hint of bad geometry. So, yeah, that type of thing can potentially trip us up. It's probably being caused, yeah, it's being caused right here where the, something about the loft is creating this little thing that's shooting out, and then that's getting compounded by this cloth surface, then generating that. I'm going to ignore it. Potentially ways around that. But, yeah, and then we get other things like this. Like, I am worried that these would be creating bad geometry. But let's just see if, in places where it would be working, let's see if the bevel does us any good. Bevel limit offset of 0.1. Yeah, so that's actually, it's doing the bevel's doing a better job than I thought it'd be able to. You see that we're getting this little bevel on the edge. If I were inclined, I could say break, fong break rounding. So that becomes like a very distinct hard edge. NA, and now, as we view this from the top, that should become you can see how we can get this very distinct highlight on that beveled corner, which will just make that pop. From a distance, it's like, anything that can catch highlights is going to go a long way and look nice. So that's going way down the rabbit hole of a very specific effect. But I think if you were to throw a paper texture on here, even a flat frontal projection, it's going to just make the corners are going to have like that really nice subtle effect. So that can just get saved. I'll save it in such an angle that we can kind of see what we are going for. And that should wrap that one up. Hopefully I covered it for you. Let's see, there's some conversation going back and forth. Paper folds. I don't know if that's a question for me, but I'm going to currently ignore it. Take a look at YouTube. IPR. Trigger. Ehab is saying trigger scale animation of an object on the collision of, say, a particle or a clone when they hit the plane, like a rain splash. Yeah, and I got it right. It is Ehab. Okay, so let me think. Currently, I don't have X particles installed, so we can't do that. But I tend to try and do everything in vanilla cinema as much as I can, just so it can help the most people. Hey, Lucas. So I'm currently trying to think of triggering an animation. One of the tricky parts is that the thing that you want to have, the effect you want to have happen, needs to ultimately end living in the place where it collided. So let's just say we have a plane, and you're going to have something go, and let's say you have a water drop, and you want the water drop to go down and then hit the surface, and then you want something to happen. Well, something needs to exist at that place where it eventually collides. So at that point, it's the type of thing where if you're doing a particle system, there'd be two main approaches. It would be a particle would fly and then hit that surface and then freeze, and now that it's done a collision, take on some sort of new property. The alternative would be as it collides with that thing, it just keeps doing its own thing, but it spawns a new child particle right at that moment. It's a different type of particle. It does different things at that place. Then, so that's kind of like the two particle ways of doing it. And then we've got the, what if we build a rig to do it type of way. And that essentially goes the same type of way where we need the original one to stay there or something new to spawn at that location for something to happen. So let's try building a rig. And yeah, why not? We'll build a rig. So there's a lot of ways we could approach this. But yeah, I actually kind of like that idea. What if I make a matrix object? And I like doing this. If we make a... That's a silly detail. We don't need to get that specific. I will just make this be 20 by 20 with 0 spacing in between. That way, all the spacing will come from a random effector, 0 height, and let's add 350. So there, we got a bunch of randomized points. And let's say each of these eventually will be 1 raindrop. Now, here's, let's just, we now know the location that eventually one of our particles, one of our raindrops will hit. So we have all that information now by pre-making here. We are not making anything up. It's just kind of already there. I think I'd like to make a second matrix, and let's just call this one the drop. And instead of it getting an effector, and instead of it generating a grid, it'll be based on the object, and the object will be the matrix. And if we hide that one, then now you can see that we've got a new matrix based on the first one. So we'll just call this one source. This one is where the drops will be. Transform, let's colorize it blue just so we can see it a little bit better. It's not showing the color. Honestly, color. Oh, no, sorry. Show color, please. Oh, no, it doesn't do that either. I've run into this before. I don't want to see that color dot. Let's say none. I don't understand why it doesn't show the color there. Like by me, if this, why is this color here if it's not going to do anything? It doesn't have effect. Having said that, if I just make a plain effector and I say take on the field color, well, we could say take on a custom color. There, now I can colorize it. So I don't know why it's not taking it from the original source, but there you go. So I'll just leave this as color because I don't care about that. The new one, or now I want these drops to go up into the air somehow in some sort of random way. What is going to be my method for that? There's a lot of possible methods. Actually, that could work. Because of the method we did where these are all randomly at 0, it's not like we have a grid, so there's not like this index uniformity. Like index-wise, this might be like 0, 1, 2, 3. They're all over the place. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. Where is my live stream software? There it is. 1 second. And I'm back. Itchy nose. Okay, so these are supposed to be doing what? I want them flying up into the air. So that's pretty straightforward in that I just want another plane that can calculate after. They are going to push up into the air. And 555, that's just a quick number. And how do we want them to go up in the air? Well, I think I want to do it with a step. Oh, wow, look at that. It makes a perfect grid. I guess that's not surprising. So here is a step is pushing them into the air, and that becomes sort of an offset for us. And I'm hoping that's just a step, layer, remap, color remap. There's potential, like we can increase the strength, and you'll see that more of them will go up. That will probably become an important slider for us. But I want to see how much we can automate this. So I'm going to create a time. And actually, I think the time can be set to normal, and we put the step as the offset. So if we hit play, you see that they're all going to travel up into the sky and then eventually just be done. I want the opposite, so invert? No. Invert direction. That's direction. We don't want to use direction. How do we make, can I just say negative 30? Yeah, I think negative 30 is fine, but now we have to offset it forward. So let's say it's living in negative 30. Yeah, okay. So if I live in a negative time, then now they'll go down. So let's live in a further negative time. Let's say negative 60. And now you see they even individually start falling down. And then we can start spreading them out more by cranking up this remap. So if I add another 0 in there, I think... is the clamping us? Maybe the time... I feel like I should just invert the value after the fact. But I just want to see if I get that sort of working. Yeah, I don't want to go back further. We could slow them down, but I don't think that's what I want to do either. I'm going to reset that to 0, put this back to default of 30, which means I should be pushing upward. I'll take a look at that next R2R. Let me think. I'm just trying. There's a dozen different ways we could do this. I'm just trying to think of the cleanest, logical one that gives us a very controllable rig. So that's a rate. It's pushing up. That makes sense that it would push up. We could do two different things. We can. I just want to get the effect to make it look like it's going very nicely up, and then we can invert it. Now, the step. There's no offset. That's what's throwing me off. Is we get this value, but there's no offset. Maybe we have to increase the max. Maybe that's what we do. No, then they all go. Is there some sort of clamp? No, see, these all move up and down. That's what I'm trying to stop. Is I don't want them all moving up and down. How do we spread them out? Step. Yeah, I'm not liking the step. The step is not doing it for me. I wonder if we can use a formula. It's a little dangerous, but if we use the ID, then that becomes like a big multiplier. They all move again. Yeah, Ehab is asking a slightly, well, he's asking a clarification question about doing it maybe just straight up with dynamics, which we could do. A little frustrated that I'm having as much trouble as I am here. It's possible I shouldn't have been doing the stuff with offset. Like if I pull that out and just multiply, I wonder if things start changing a bit. Ooh, that's bizarre. I should do this in my own time because there's going to be a good way of doing it, but I need to think it out. There's a lot of cool things we could do, but I have to think about the mechanics of it more specifically. Man, it would be really cool. The step. What we need is step. I really wish there's a step that had a time offset that we could feed it, but step can't be fed time. You could feed time a step, but not vice versa. And then the formula here. Taking like the ID times the time. I wonder if that could be a thing. ID times T. Ah, dang. Okay, I'm just going to give up. The I'm going to give up this thing. I would love to explore this more. I just don't have any time to do it outside of like trying to record a tutorial. I will save it just as a thing to hopefully be explored later. But let's try doing a dynamic version, which I think will be easier. I was trying to make a more robust rig that would be very controllable, but dynamics would be simpler if clunkier. Droplets fail. Now let's simplify. Go away. Go away. Well, we might want that one, so I'll hold on to that one. So keep it quick by creating we're building a rig this time. You just want to trigger when it collides. So if you're building a singular object, you can do all sorts of cool things. So let's make some colors in here so everything's not identical. Okay, so that is going to be our drop, just to keep it clean. That is dynamic, so rigid body. The plane will be our collider, so it is a collider body. If we apply, it's going to fall, and it's going to hit that bonk, and it bounces around, does its own thing. That's all good. Let's get Xpresso-y. Right-clicking, we say Programming, Xpresso, and we are going to be doing dynamics type things. If you right-click, you go New Node, Dynamics, and Dynamic Collision? Yes, Dynamic Collision. It wants object A. I think we can feed in the physical object of the drop. And this is saying when object A collides with object B, what? And we can output a couple of different things like the force, the point where it happened. There's a lot of different things we can potentially do. I'm thinking, what if we just look if the count changes? And if the count changes, then... and right now it's actually a count of 0. So maybe it's not even if the count changes. It'll just be if the count isn't 0. So we'll say compare. So if the count equals 0, I'll say if it doesn't equal 0. That's what we're doing. Currently, this is all good. I would like to make it very literal what we're seeing. So I'll make a text object and move it up to this upper corner. Drag this in. And now we can see what the count is saying. Output text. So you see it says 0. Now this is supposed to be when this collides, and I'll say 1 collision per pair. But if I don't feed in an object B, then it's trying to find any object it might be. I'm a little surprised. Oh, that's output object A, object B. Maybe. But let's just see. That says 0, but keep an eye and let's see if we see a blip. Okay, you see right there it changed to a 1. So, boop, it is now detected that it's collided with something. So, when it collides with something, what should happen? Well, pretty much anything we want. In this case, how about we turn off the dynamics instantly? I don't know if that'll work, but let's go and drag the dynamics tag of this object in. And what would the controls be? Well, we've got dynamic on or off. And if it's off, I think it just stops. The only worry would be if it suddenly jumps back up. Let's see. Off. Whoop. Okay, it does jump back up. But if it's on, and I do that, it'll just suddenly stop in place. So it's enable that we care about here. So I want to control if it's enabled or not. Currently, this is outputting true or false. Like, is it not equaling? So what I like doing here is searching for a condition. So this is going to be fed a true or false statement. And depending on if it's true, I think if it's true, it's number 1. If it's false, it's the other. But I mix that up all the time. So let's just see. It is going to output a bool. So it's just like, here's a parameter. If it's true or false, and if we feed this in correctly, and then we need more time. So if we start out the animation and we say, yes, it's on, you see, actually, it's turning it off right away. So I did it backwards. On, off. Boop. Oh, interesting. It is, okay, yes. This makes perfect sense. In fact, the new tutorial that's coming out is going to be talking about this. What is happening right now? Well, look, this drop is just falling over and over again. Well, that's because it's turning off But then the instant it turns off, it's then turning this number back to a 0, which means it turns itself back on again. And when it turns back on, it's going to appear back up at the top. So we actually don't want that to be constantly turning it on or off. This is just a condition to trigger an on state. So when this is true, which is when they're not equal, then execute this. So execute this being enabled. If it's executing that being enabled or not enabled, we need to set that. I want to search for a constant. So there's a constant variable. I'll set that to a bool. I'm going to say when it's constantly saying, hey, turn off. That's saying turn off, turn off, turn off. But this is saying, yes, but this entire node only executes if it's true. So when it's true, that will suddenly turn off. This is currently on. If I hit play, hopefully it hits the ground and it just stops. It has now stopped being dynamic and it's just turned off. It's going to be off forever. Even if we rewind, it's still off forever. So another thing we need to do in this kind of condition loop is turn this back on again. So that condition we'll do by creating an entire copy of that rig. And I'm going to say, actually, you turn on. And what condition do you turn on? When the time, search for a time node. When time, actually not time, but when the frame equals 0. When the time equals 0, turn the dynamics on. That is what we just said. So if I rewind all the way, you can now see the dynamics tag is turned on. If I hit play, it will now fall, hit the ground, and stop. It's no longer dynamic. Rewind, it's back to being dynamic. We've now created a loop. This is almost like a video game type of thing where we've now created a condition where that will turn on or off given that. But we have now entered the idea of this on state, and we can have kind of anything we want to have happen. In this case, I'm going to keep it generic because we could literally do anything we want. So in this case, how about making a end side? That can be a child of the object, or you can make it track it. Let's make it track it. That seems better. So this should be, I'll add a couple extra rings. I will add, it'll be one frame behind, but it'll render properly. Rigging, constraint, PSR, and not the R, I just want the position. So it's going to take on the position of the drop and it should jump up there. So now you can see that that should chase it down and boop, hit the ground. It's just going to be stuck there. Now, okay, here's where things get fun. This ring, I want it to grow when this is all triggered, when this is true. So pretty much if the dynamics are off, I want that to begin to grow. So straightforward enough. How about we say the end side? I would like the radius of the end side to get changed by the radius of the end side. And I want that to get added. So let's search for the word add. I would like to add to the radius, whatever the current radius is, I would like to add, let's say 5. Every frame, every refresh, it'll add 5 and then increase the size. So if I just leave that the way it is and hit one frame forward, you're going to see it's going to grow. If I hit play, it's going to start growing constantly forever. So we don't want this always to happen. We only want it to happen if the dynamics body is false. So let's grab the dynamic tag and say basic property. I'll just drag it in. I'm not sure where it lives. So I'll say enable. So if enable is false, right now enable is just equal. We could put that into a condition. We could also just say not. So not is interesting. Let's just search for the word not. And this is just saying do the opposite. So this is currently outputting false. So this is actually saying, hey, when it's false, it's saying true. So when it's true, grow. So that should be constantly growing when it is off on the ground. So if I hit rewind and I play, that's not going to be growing. But as soon as it hits the ground, now it begins growing. Of course, it's going to grow forever. We don't want that. And when we rewind, it's still this bigger size. So very similar to what we did before, I would like my end side to do something. I would like to set the radius of the end side depending on if this condition is true. So I'll add this compare. And what do I want this radius to look like at the time of 0? I want it to look like a constant of a real value. Real. There, real. of 0. So at the time of 0, my radius should get to set to 0. So now it's every time I hit play, it's going to reset. So it's kind of like we're building our own little dynamic system there. So it's got nothing, hits the ground, and then begins to grow. Look at that. So that's working. That's exactly what we want. That is now going to grow. This could get fed into whatever system we want. That can be a sweep fed with a inside, T for scale, and give it a radius of 10 and 8 sides, which should round it out. Okay, so if we rewind, we don't see a ring at all, and then splash, the ring begins to grow. Now let's start, like, when should it end? Maybe this outer ring should fade out. It should suddenly appear as a larger size and begin to fade out. So now, how do I want to do that? I mean, it just goes back to us doing this same thing over and over again. So here we've kind of got this already built equation set up. Let's kind of group it all up nice and clean. So we kind of need to make this loop again. So I'll copy this and we'll say when it collides, I want the end side, and it is an end side, it's just a different one. Let's just call this one ring size. So that's the ring size end side. I want the radius of that and the radius of this. What I want this one to do is actually subtract. So I'll say real subtract, and it's going to subtract. I want it to be taking a little while, so let's say minus 0.1. So it's going to start shrinking. Subtract. Yeah, it's going to take the current radius and start subtracting as long as the dynamics aren't on. So if I hit play right now, it's going to be really slow, but it should be getting bigger and the ring should be getting smaller. So that's all good. It's going to keep on getting smaller, smaller, smaller. If I click on this, you see this value is shrinking. It's not very small to begin with. So let's jump this down to 11. And if I hit play, you're going to see, hopefully, yeah, you see it's shrinking and it's fading away until eventually it goes down to 0. It's gotten so small we don't even see it. Now, if I rewind, it's still at 0. So in the same way we were building those loops before, we also need to set the initial condition for that. We've kind of already got the values that we want. So again, I'll just duplicate this. This end side will get replaced with a ring size. When we hit reset, the size will be, let's say, 10. So at the beginning, the radius is 10. And then once everything triggers, it's going to begin shrinking constantly. So we hit play. And now that falls down, we get that splash, and the ring slowly fades away. What we're building right now, we have utter and complete control over every single aspect of it. This isn't like we need to build an effector and have that do a specific effect. We are mechanically building in rules that have to get triggered, and they have to do kind of whatever we tell them to do. But that also means we're in charge of every aspect of it. We have to tell it to reset at 0. We have to tell it when it's refreshing. We have to give it the conditions for when it should actually be executing. But we can now see that that will fall. It'll create our nice little splash. And it's just kind of a rig ready for us to do whatever we want. This could be turning on and off the visibility of the raindrop. It could be, let me think. I mean, it's kind of anything we think of. We could be having echoes of this splashing. I wonder if this would, it's being driven by Xpresso. I don't know if that if the MoGraph, MoInstance would even be able to see it, but I'm curious if it is. Oh yeah, it totally can. So you could actually have these echoes going. One thing that's a bit of a pain is that this is you can't skip steps. Like I only want every other one. I guess that it could calculate the history depth like that, and then under Effector, we could feed this an Effector and shrink down every other one. So I do that with a formula. Formula, don't affect that. In fact, all I want you to affect is the visibility. And we do that by typing in mod bracket ID semicolon 2 bracket. And now it doesn't look quite right, but let's hit play. Yeah, that seems to be every other one. I think if I do 3, is it every third one? Yeah, so we could potentially make little echoes like that. It's not, that's just kind of a bonus thing. Just throwing that out there. So I'll pull that out. Okay, so anyway, here's kind of apparently that gets remote linked in. So you don't make it a child. Splash. So we get that one ring and it gets thinner. Keep in mind, you could start externalizing these controls. Right now they're all internal, but we could say that the radius that's growing to we could want that to grow faster. We could have this ring size be shrinking faster. So these could become values that we build with user data. And like I said, this will pair really well with the new tutorial that comes out next week or is available right now on Patreon already. But I could have this ring shrink down twice as fast by doubling its value. So now you see the ring kind of ends when it gets to the edge here, but now it'll go and shrink, and it shrinks about halfway to the edge. So just a change that we can make there. I've gone so far when I'm building complex rigs like this to even make it turn the Xpresso tag off. It'll turn itself off, and a different Xpresso tag will turn them all back on at the end. So that's a single rig doing a single thing. Let's simplify. I don't need the text anymore. So the only other thing I'm thinking is like this rig requires that drop and this sweep. So if we want to make more, here's the only sort of unfortunate thing, although this is a really good chance to show recall. Well, here's the thing, is if you want to have more than one drop do its thing, you totally can, because we built all the work in that one bit of Xpresso. So I'll save the scene file. Boop, boop, boop. I could just copy, I'm going to move it up to the top so I can copy paste. Now I have a second drop, and I can move this one up and over a little bit, and let's even copy paste again. I'll move another one up and over a different amount. Each one of those is a completely independent system, and they'll each do their completely own thing, which is totally fine. That's great. The main problem is that if you want to make a change to your Xpresso, then you kind of have to... You have to make a change, but now there's 3 Xpresso tags. So you have to make a change to every one of the Xpresso rigs. So then it ends up being a lot quicker to delete out the Xpresso and make changes and then copy and paste them again. So then you kind of there's a lot of things you might want to do. Here's where it kind of sucks is Xpresso can't calculate inside of a cloner. So if I were to put this into a cloner and we get our, let's rewind all the way, zero that out. These should probably be zeroed out inside of their null. There we go. So these become our individual raindrops, and we can make any size that we want. Let's even add in a random, very important, random. And our vertical height is one of the most important ones, just so they hit at different times. So this cloner could be saying, hey, I want to make a bunch of copies. And those are getting scooted up and down. The problem is that, let me show you, I'm gonna hit save. If I play, they're all going to be copies of each other, and you see it's being really weird. Like if they jumped back up to the top and they all execute at the same time. So in order to make this work, you actually have to make the cloner editable, which I always hate when you have to do that. But now we have kind of an unlimited number of clones, and now that we've made them editable, each will individually calculate. So that now can do its thing. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. Let's hit undo. Well, here's what happens all the time. And I'm going to show you a demo for Recall, which is the only plugin that it's the only plugin that Rocket Lasso has released so far. But like I said, there's another one coming soon. And it's a little dangerous to show you this because I'm running a slightly beta version of the Recall. We're trying to make a couple tweaks to it. So I'm not entirely sure this one's stable. So if something goes wrong, it's not in the retail version. But anyway, here's what happens to me all the time. I build these types of rigs where I'm making like a dynamic chain or a rig like this. I build these types of rigs all the time. Like pretty often when I do some sort of client work, I'm getting hired to do this type of rig. And I'll build a rig like this and I have to make it editable. It's like, okay, I'm doing it. I make it editable and I'm doing all my work, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, cool. Like that's good. And nothing's, everything's fine. And then I start changing render settings. And then I start changing different variables. And I start changing textures. And it's like, oh, dang it, I have to change the rig. And meanwhile, the rig has been broken. The rig broke like a long time ago. I broke the rig and I can't bring it back again. I'd have to rebuild it by remaking the cloner, reapplying effectors, pull one of them out, modify the Xpresso tag. I'd have to go and manually do all of that. So hoping that it works. I'm gonna hit undo. So we do have our cloner. So our cloner is doing its thing. It's all set up and we've only got one Xpresso tag. If I right click and I add a recall tag, and once again, this is a plugin from Rocket Lasso, so this isn't in Vanilla Cinema, but if you want to support the stuff that I do, picking up this tool and helping your workflow is a great way of doing it. I've added a recall tag. You can click the store button, or even better, just double click. And I've now stored this object and its entire hierarchy. Everything about it has been stored. So if I were to take this cloner and make it editable, actually the tag gets killed by certain objects being made editable. This is really easy to fix. All I have to do is put that into a null. And let's put the recall tag. When you put anything on a cloner, if you make it editable, it dies. If you put anything on a connect object, put any tag, it dies. So that's happening there. So ignore that. We just say, let me do that from scratch. Right click on that null, say recall, and now I've stored this entire hierarchy and everything about it. And that means I can make my cloner editable. And now I've got, whatever, there's like a dozen plus of these, and they can go and do their splash. And now I'm like, okay, cool, that's working. So now I can hit T for scale and scale up the floor bigger. And then I can go into new camera positions. I could say, let's make this a little bit more detailed. I could add let's add some reflection on here. Add a bit of Beckman, why not? And so that's all going. And it's like, okay. And now the client's coming back, or I'm like, oh no, I need to change something about my rig. Well, let's see if this works. If I double click this recall tag, which I stored everything, that will bring it back to what it used to be. So my modified floor, it's still there. This modified material, it's still there. But I was able to jump back to the state where I had this when I made it. So now I can make any changes I want. Let's say that we actually want this to be 6x6, and this random, let's make that even more variation vertically. And now I've got a lot more of those, so that's all working fine. I could be like, okay, I'm not going to modify that anymore. If I bring it back, I still want to bring it back to the previous. Or I can say, no, let's just override that. So now that's the new current state of this. And now in order to see this work, I do have to make it editable. So I'll make it editable. And I hit play. And now splash, 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 splash. All the splashes are working perfectly. And then it's like, oh, dang it. You know what? I really want these cubes to disappear. I don't want to see these cubes when they splash. And I've made a bunch of changes, and I can't undo back to that step. Double click recall, jumped back to when we stored it, go into the Xpresso tag. And now let's say that the cube should visually turn off, or can I just turn it off? I'm not sure if we can. Let's try turning it off. I'm going to say, at the same time that this is saying turn off the dynamics, can we just turn off the cube? We might have to turn off the visibility, but I'm going to say that I want that to be when it turns on. And I want it to turn off with this false. And then, of course, we need to turn it back on again. So I'll bring this up here. And when the time is 0, I want this to now be true. Now, I can interlink to these other nodes if they have it, but if it starts getting too busy, I'm not shy about just making a duplicate of it and then linking it there. So that's a new true node. Now there's not so many wires crisscrossing each other. Now, let's see if that works. In fact, I could just override again, make my cloner editable. And let's see if, yeah, maybe that was the cube is, let's bring it back. The cube is not 0. That's true. Enable on 0, enable true. That seems correct. Let me think. Well, let's just try it again. Let's make it editable. Because now recall is actually storing it. We can bring it back. Wait, that's fine. Okay, yeah, look, the cube turned off and those splashes are happening. If we rewind, they come back. Okay, it did work. So now we get the droplet. The droplet disappears, and you see I was able to store it, bring it back, make changes, and then I'm free to go and make other changes into the scene however I want to. And now I've got a rig that's super easy to make modifications to. And honestly, this is one of the main reasons I made recall is because, well, me and my brothers made recall because all the time I'm building this type of rig, and it's like, I don't want to have to bring it back. There's so many changes to make, and as soon as anything changes about this, it's like, I want to go back to the simple state. And it's like, well, I totally can. Just go back, double click. Now we're back to that rig, make changes I want to make. Now it's as simple as making the cloner editable, and I don't have to worry. I can always go back and save that other one. I could be making multiple recall tags to be storing all the different rigs. We can make one where those are making extra rings. We can be making, and each one could store different collections. But anyway, I think that's pretty cool. I like the splash. Like this is the type of rig, like I said, we build all the time, and it could do anything we want it to. This rig That's the power of this. MoGraph allows you to play around and get things for free. Building things with nodes, in this case Xpresso, but in the future scene nodes, you tell it exactly what you want it to do. And in this case, we wanted these to grow and do exactly what we're seeing. But the end result is pretty cool. So I will save this. If you have recall, you'll be able to restore it to the earlier state. But otherwise, that's good there. I'll see if there's any follow-ups. Yeah, this should be a plugin. But yeah, and you see all that recall there is doing, it's not doing anything we couldn't do anyway. It's just making sure that we can go back and jump to a state that we need. That's good to hear, Dean. Yeah, there's a ripple shader, but Monthys, the big point here is, yes, that's creating geometry, but that could be a shockwave. This could be causing a plant to grow, that you manually build a rig of like the way this plant will grow and then have those things get fed through time. This could be, we could be feeding that stuff through range mappers. We could, I mean, literally build anything. That could be an entire car animation executing the way we want it to. That could be a dynamically driven with a motor car rig that is like navigating around based on rules. You're feeding it from Xpresso. So you can program stuff to do anything. This arbitrarily was a ripple effect, but it could be anything. Let's see. Actually, we're already, wow, time flew by. We're already 22 minutes over. We'll see if there's any easy questions. Thanks, Ehab. I appreciate it. But yeah, recall is awesome. So let's see if there's any questions. Object disappears. Yeah, we're about to finish. Yeah, typo. Yeah, or typo. We're about to be done today. Maybe we can do a very simple thing. MoGraph, nice name, is asking if there's an easy way to disable or gray out custom user data. Some easy way with Xpresso. Unfortunately, no. There's not an easy way to do it. It can be done with code. Code can hide user data. And in the past, I've had written code that could execute a node, a Python node, and it would just turn off user datas. And that's definitely a thing that we did. And I think that actually is in the old transform tool, the old GSG transform. There's a lot of that going on where it's hiding user datas. But we just know a lot more now. But there's no internal way in Xpresso to manipulate user datas. They're kind of on or off. But a Python node, you could then, address details of user data. So sadly, no. Trying to think, there's nothing we can do to manipulate user data except for changing an active variable. So yeah, that goes in the world of code. Pierre is asking, can you parent or constrain something to another object but have it lag in animation a few frames? That's an interesting question. Yes, you totally can. I'm curious of why you'd want to, but let's make a simple version of that, and we should be able to do it no problem. So, I'm going to make a cube, and we'll make different colors so we can see everything clearly. So we got a green cube, and it will just randomly move around very quickly. So, we'll enable some animation. 2222. And the frequency's up relatively high. Let's go up further. 5,000, but we'll slow it down. Okay, so you see this is moving around. And now we want something to chase this. So we'll make a sphere. And make another material. And I want that to chase it. So how about we add a rigging tag, constraint. And I'm going to say I want to follow the PSR. I want to follow, let's just say the position. I want to follow the position of this. Now, you'll immediately see that this is already lagging one frame behind. And that will render that way, I do believe, because this is calculating after the, well, it calculates first. This chase is calculating before the vibrate tag. You see that Xpresso is happening at 0, but if I click on this tag, it's actually happening also at 0. Now, you see there's one frame of lag, but if I move the sphere below it, it's actually directly inside of it. But if we keep on chaining this the wrong order effectively, if I make another sphere above it, and we'll make the next material, and I tell this next sphere to follow the previous sphere, then now that one is going to be lagging 1 frame behind the other one. And we can actually start doubling the speed we do these by copying and pasting both of them. And now I just have to link this one to its previous. And now I can copy and paste again. And each time we're doubling. And we'll even do one last one because it's easy. Copy, paste. And tell that one to chain onto that one. So essentially we have a perfect out of order. They're calculating in reverse order. And now I've got an entire snake that's going to be chasing its tail around because they can't calculate in the proper order. Now you could order this however you want to and then manually reorder the priority, and that would work. To tell you the truth though, like, well, I mean, you can do this. It totally works, and the stuff is now lagging 1 frame behind, and it could be done however you want to. My preferred method of getting kind of this effect is actually just using Spring, so then we can actually do the proper order. Although I kind of want to do it in the proper order so we can see it. But if I turn on Spring, I might need to, it might be a little harder to, no, it should work. I'm going to say I want the position to follow the cube. And then now it is chasing it around, and it is still pretty crazy. But now it's not, this is not a frame of lag anymore. It's just the springiness. And so there's a, let's get rid of length. So now this is trying to be directly on the cube, but it's going to be very springy and it can never catch up. There's a couple settings here that really help. The lower the stiffness, it's going to be trying a lot less hard to get to it. It will eventually get to it, except of course that keeps running away. Or we can leave this up at a higher value, let's say 25. So now it's trying really hard to get there, but it's very, very springy, and we can start adding a lot of drag. And so now it's just constantly kind of tailing behind, and it kind of looks like it's lagging a frame behind, but it's a little more elegant. And now we can kind of do that same trick. So I'm going to say the sphere should follow the sphere, and now I can start duplicating both of those. And actually, I have to copy paste. You can't just, the relative links are remembered if you don't copy paste. So let's copy paste, but move them down. And now I think, yeah, that can link to there. Let's just make sure that's working. Yep, so that's all 4. And now let's do it again. Copy paste. Make the top one link to the bottom one. And we'll do it one last time because it's going to look cool. Copy paste. And make it follow. So we hit play. And now this is the proper order of operations, and they just are following the different tail. And depending on the springiness, I feel like I might have linked something wrong there because there seems to be a gap that shouldn't be, but I'm not sure. If I select all of these, we can increase the stiffness, and now they're going to be a lot more inclined to catch up. Yeah, I must have done something wrong where I missed 2 of them. But you can see how they're chasing each other along, and depending on the springiness and the stiffness, well, the less drag, the more springy they become. So drag is definitely important here, and you can like really crank the drag up, and only if they're like really forced to get pulled will they move. But yeah, layering this stuff up like this can be really cool. And if you crank the stiffness up quite a bit and set their length down, actually, yeah, now they're going to be completely stuck because it is a proper order of operation. So you have to leave the stiffness back a little bit. There we go. Nice looking worm. So yeah, instead of physically making lag, I can just drag these through, and it just smooths them all out. Zoom, 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 zoom. It's a nice way of getting kind of a motion blur behind as well. Wee, wee. Pretty cool. And there's lots of ways to do various things. I mean, if you're building this type of thing, I mean, this is nice because we can control it this way, but you could also just put a tracer behind that thing and clone onto the tracer, and there's going to be a bunch of tails following behind. In cinema, there's probably a dozen different ways of doing every trick, but that's just one of them. Bum, 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 bum. So, springtail. All right, so we went over a half hour over. Thanks for all the questions, everybody. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out. It's fun, as always. I hope you do get a chance to go and check out Recall. Recall is a really good plugin, so go check that out. In fact, I should probably put a link of that in the description. If anybody saw it and they liked the look of it, then you know, it's good stuff. Head over to the Rocket Lasso store page. There's a link inside of there to get to the help page, and there's like really good videos on everything it can do. It can do a lot, so go and check it out. But yeah, there's some fun questions today. We went a little bit deeper. We went a little crazy with the Xpresso on that. I mean, it was a cool use case. The problem with doing Xpresso tutorials is literally everybody who wants to make a rig wants to make something different. So it's more about learning the tool, and so that you can make it do what you want to do, because there cannot be a tutorial on everything. So the idea of kind of that almost video game-esque thing of, here's a rule. If that happens, this condition happens. And then create a reset condition, and that can create those loops for you. Oh, yeah. Oh, no beard. Yep, the beard got pulled back. It was getting a little crazy. And, the weather's slowly warming up, so I had to be prepared for that as well. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. That'll wrap it up. There's a bonus stream tomorrow for people on Patreon, so I'll see everybody who's part of that there tomorrow. Other than that, keep an eye out for the next tutorial, and keep an eye out for the next Rocket Lasso Live, which will be next Wednesday, of course. So that will be it for me today. I'll see everybody tomorrow bonus, or Wednesday for the next one. Bye-bye.